Okay, fine. It's okay. You can move to the next slide. Great. Yeah, so I want to start my presentation with a little anecdote. A few weeks ago, I was in the Drôme, which is a region in the southeast of France, and we traveled through the Baronnie, which is the picture you see on the left, which is a land of extensive grazing pastures in the wooded mosaic of them in wooded mountains. It's a very lonely and empty land, so you wonder about the farmers who are up there. And when you come down out of these mountains of the Baronnie, as it's called, that area, you end up in Dieu-le-Fils, which is the little town on the right. And there on that square where the picture's taken, there's a brasserie, a pub, which sells Dromo burgers. Yeah, it's a hamburger, a very generous hamburger, mega, and made with, that's the interesting thing, made with, according to the menu, with grass-fed beef from exactly those. They've named the farms up in the Baronnie, where we came down, and goat cheese from, again, the farms up there in the mountains. So, which is really nice, because that's an income support for those farmers who are probably, helping to keep them up there in the mountains. And the letters in red below, the little sentence there is also very nice. It's from the Rhone in Germany, which I visited some years ago. And that's another area, an upland area, where the farmers aren't exactly doing too well. And I noticed there were several restaurants and bars, pubs in there, where they had on the menu, they had the sentence saying that please choose, when you choose a dish, please choose one that's made with produce from the local farmers, because that helps to preserve the landscape you tourists came here to see. So that's very nice. And there's hundreds of initiatives like this all over Europe. And if you want to, but by their nature, they're all in rural areas. And the vast majority of consumers, including the affluent and highly educated ones, are most likely to be sensitive to this kind of nature, climate, water issues, or supporting local producers. They live in the cities and suburbs. And they can't all go to the farm gate or farm shops or farmers markets. So we need universal labels that cover at least like national or even higher level, so that these urban and suburban people can find nature-friendly food in their urban supermarkets. Next. Yes, that's one. So, but a label to be taken seriously needs a lot of work and investment. And within the ABC group, the Eurosite Agriculture Working Group, we focused on the 4 last questions in this list. And the 4th one, it's about monitoring. We discussed the difference between performance indicators and impact indicators.
I'm sorry,
I'll just keep talking. Performance indicators measure actions. They're relative, like things like when do you mow, how much fertilizer you use, what's your stocking density. And they're relatively easy to monitor and to audit. And as we'll see later on, they're very widely used by labels. But the problem with them is that they do not prove that biodiversity gains from the actions they measure. The other kind of indicators, impact indicators, they do directly measure the biodiversity gains or losses, but they require more effort. And whereas the actions which performance indicators measure can be uniform, like date of mowing, stocking density, whatever, and therefore comparable across farms and districts, this is not so evident for impact indicators, because each territory has its own biodiversity, as it were. And in the ABC group, we were very intrigued by a presentation we had once about the indicators developed by Tim Cole and his colleagues in Operation Wallacea. And what they did, they select 5 impact indicators, metrics they call them, which are relevant for a particular project area. The baseline of these indicators is measured, and then they're monitored at regular points through time. And a 1% improvement, they call it uplift in their jargon, in the median of the differences between the values over time, the values for the indicators, whichever species or there might happen to be, is taken as 1 unit per hectare. And these units are arithmetical quantities, they are numbers, which means they're abstract. And that means you can compare them between projects, between districts and regions. So that's very interesting. And they can also be traded on the market because of their currency, their numbers. So hence Planet is developing these pilot projects to use them based on these metrics indicators as biodiversity credits for investors. Okay, next. Okay, so this is an important question too. And when we examined in the ABC group the sustainability labels used by the Dutch dairy sector, we found that the label agents carry out regular checks, audits, and inspections, just as what is mentioned here on the slide. They use independent certifiers who in themselves are again audited by third parties. And our impression was that the Dutch Animal Welfare Society, they have a label, Beter Leven, Better Life, is particularly tightly enforced and audited. Every year, at least 20% of the farms who have this Dutch Animal Welfare label get unannounced inspections, because an unannounced inspections are the best, because if you tell them you're coming, that's not a good idea. And this does really seem to us the right approach. Sloppy labels, which are open to cheating, will sooner or later run into a scandal, and that will destroy the reputation and that of labels in general. And plenty of shoppers are already very skeptical of the truth behind labels. And in this regard, the new draft green claims legislation issued by the Commission is interesting, because under it, market players will have to prove that environmental claims they make for their labels and products are genuine. So if in any follow-up project we develop or support any label, we better make damn sure that this label conforms to whatever methodology the green claims laws cook up. Next. And a very important aspect is the supply chain. And unless the consumer is buying directly from the farm, produce from a nature-friendly farm goes through the wholesaler, the processor, the retailer, before it actually reaches the consumer. And the consumer must then be reassured that the items labeled sustainable, nature-friendly, whatever, truly do entirely 100% come from farms which deserve that label. That there's no mixing of green and gray produce somewhere in the supply chain. And again, when we examined these Dutch dairy sector labels, we found they have set up systems to ensure a separation between labeled produce and other produce which is not labeled all the way down the chain. So the label follows the produce from the moment it leaves the farm as raw material all the way down the wholesaling, processing, and retailing chain. Farms can't get the label as a solo players. They must join supply chains, which are managed by supply chain managers who are appointed by the labeling agencies. And these agencies also conclude contractual arrangements with processors and retailers so that there's a legally enforceable understanding of what is required of them. For that they have to, for instance, keep the label produce separate. And if they don't, they can be taken to court or whatever. So this logistical separation between labeled and non-labeled would look to us to be a vital aspect of any label. It ought to be critically examined when judging a label or setting one up. Okay, next. Well, we have several ideas and remarks from the group about this one. By the way, these happen to be some examples of labeled dairy products that, just to give you an idea of where, and you can, if you look close, you can see the various labels on the packaging. Well, first remark is, and that's probably nothing new to you, is that citizens complain there are too many labels and they get confused. So we had this feeling that it would be better to improve existing labels rather than starting even more new ones. At the same time, a lot of the existing labels are not always familiar to the average shopper. And we had a testimony from our Dutch members who said that apart from your organic label, which is known to everybody, pretty much, the animal welfare-oriented label is actually the one that's best known, because the Animal Welfare Society backing it does a lot of TV advertising about it, and they seem to have the money for it, which is nice for them. So the message is a label needs to be pushed and pushed and pushed. You know, if you have to bribe influencers on social media, do whatever, but get the message out. Okay, consumers who want to know more about label content, there was another remark that was made, often find it very difficult to get hold of the technical details and criteria behind the labels. Even when they consult the websites of the organizations, particularly the commercial companies that are using them. We actually tried it ourselves, and this not actually quite easy to actually find the really specific technical details. And this does not really make the labels transparent, and it's something I think we should be looking at. And then another suggestion came, we should be using more modern information technology to fill this information gap. For instance, making data on the biodiversity impact of nature-friendly farming available online, or putting a QR code on packaging, which gives access to data and background stories. In fact, this QR code, some said, might even take the place of generic labels. You know, unique stories about individual batches rather than some label just covering a whole lot of different things. Next, please. Okay, so well, the feel-good factors, of course, is doing your bit for nature, animals, and the planet, and getting moral satisfaction from that. But it doesn't pay the bills, a cynic would say, and that's why market rewards for producers making an extra effort are so important. Now, consumer preference on the right. Here, the expectation is that enough consumers care sufficiently about nature and the environment to preferentially buy products with the appropriate label. So what these people do, they scan the supermarket shelves looking for the labels, and when they find labeled products, that's what they put in their shopping cart. And so the producer sells more thanks to the label. Competitive advantages, that's a bit vaguer, but 2 examples. Some public procurement procedures require or prefer labeled produce. So that's interesting because it means that you have easier access to a contract because you're a labeled producer. And we were also told that the Rabobank, which is the biggest bank in the Netherlands, lending to farmers, it gives lower interest rates on certain kinds of investment to farmers which have been approved for sustainability labels. And this thing of banks giving a lower interest rate for nature-friendly farmers or labeled ones raised a lot of interest in our group. And we feel that it's worth exploring further and getting more organizations to grant labeled products preference or give privileged treatment to their producers. And then, the higher market price or direct bonus payments. Something that struck us is that many labels do not pay a bonus to the farmers, nor do they oblige the supply chain to pay more to farmers for labeled produce. So basically, they rely on the feel-good factor and the consumer preference, and that's it. So apart from selling more because of this consumer preference, the only way a producer gets a financial reward from being labeled is when the label or the product which it covers is so prestigious that consumers are willing to pay premium prices to get hold of some. I mean, think of champagne or Jamon Iberico or Westmalle Troppenspier. Unfortunately, many of our nature-friendly produce is still a long way from such fame. Next. However, when we examined the Dutch dairy labels for sustainability, we found that some do pay the farmers. And the slide shows you for just 2 examples. Friesland Campina's is a dairy processor, and Albert Heijn is a major supermarket chain. And so farmers with the appropriate label get paid more per liter of milk that they supply. And if you work it out for a sort of typical dairy farm in the Netherlands producing 500,000 liters of milk a year, from Friesland Campina, that farm would get €22,500 extra income a year for having the label. And from Albert Heijn, the same farm would get €25,000 extra income a year for having the label. And that's real money and good news for the labeled farmers. But from a conservation viewpoint, there's something else we discussed. The great weakness in these kinds of flat rate payments, so many euro cents per liter, is the fact that they are flat. And next, please. To understand that, we have to look at how these labels are structured. And typically they contain a set of themes. Next, please. Yeah, so this is an example, on the way to planet proof, in this particular case. It has to have a set of themes. And to get the label, the farmers have to comply with the requirements of these themes. In fact, these requirements are more like bands, with a bottom level and a top level, and you have to be somewhere in between as a farmer to get the label. So you have to reach a set minimum, the basic level for each theme, to qualify for the label. And you must reach the top level for at least one theme, at least in this on the way to planet proof label. Okay, next, please. Oh, wait, sorry. Go back, please. Yeah, that's right. Sorry. Okay, yeah, there you are. On this is the one I was looking for. I think you just went a bit too fast. Okay. So this one gives you the exact precise requirements and figures, for the basic and top levels for protein, nitrogen, ammonia per minute grassland. And if you look carefully, and that's our problem with these kinds of flat rate payments, is there's no advantage in going beyond the top level. There's not even necessary or interesting to reach the top level for more than one theme, because if you reach the top level of one theme, you get the label. There's no point in going to 2 or 3 themes to reach the top level. Why should you? The farmer does not get a bonus in doing so. You get the same payment per liter of milk to a farmer who barely just passes the minimum, the basic levels everywhere, as to a farmer who reaches the top level for every theme or even goes beyond it. So it's better than having no payment at all, but to have a real impact on nature, I think we would need something a bit more sophisticated. Next, please. So this is Focus Planet. That's a new sustainability program being used since 1st of January 2023 by Friesland Campina, the biggest dairy processor in the Netherlands. And it has a sliding payment system. So it has various themes like the other one, but farmers paid more or less according to how well they score on each per theme. And this is a complete overview of the different themes. And each has a threshold value. So it could be the amount of nitrogen or ammonia per hectare or percent of permanent pasture. The farmer has to achieve the threshold before any payment is given. And once the threshold is reached, the payment it kicks in, you get the first payment, and it goes up and increases as the farm performance goes further beyond the threshold until a defined maximum value of the theme is reached. Next. So this is, again, this is taken directly from the Focus Planet program. It's all in Dutch, but you can see, look at you see the different details, nitrogen, ammonia, emissions, protein, permanent pasture, and so forth. Next. And here's an example how it works. So if you look at this particular, if we have the farm at the bottom, we see we have a farm, an example with 90 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare. So it's halfway between the threshold value and the maximum value. So it gets 5 euro cents per 100 kilo of milk produced. But if the same farm would improve its nitrogen balance and it would reach the maximum value 20 kilo and then go above it to 10 kilo per nitrogen per hectare, which is really, really good, it would not actually get more. It would simply get the same 10 euro cents a liter as when it had 20 kilogram per hectare. So again, so while the sliding system does reward effort and better performance by paying more for farmers who are between the threshold value and going up towards the maximum value, once it reaches the maximum value set per theme, it doesn't pay you more. So it discourages excellence in going to the highest possible level. So it's still not yet what we are looking for as an ideal label. Next one. So we also heard some presentations about some specific label, and this one here, the Natura 2000 label, should be interesting from our agriculture working group viewpoint, because it is because it's nature friendly by definition. To get the label, the farmer has to be conforming to the Natura 2000 objectives. But the problem is with this label is, well, first of all, the requirements for granting the label, which are written in the Commission decision, are very vague. And a meeting on the 28th of March with the Commission official in charge of the logo itself revealed there's no guidance from the Commission how an operation system should look like. It will left to the member states, because each member state has to sort of apply to the Commission to use a label. As the Commission then signs a kind of contract with the Commission, and then the member state can start using the Natura 2000 label and giving it out to producers. So it'd be left to the member states to devise their own national systems and standards and checks and audits. And so that means there's a risk that different member states will apply it and interpret it in different ways. And the Commission will not be monitoring how the member states will use this logo in practice. And there's no auditing or regular reporting from member states to the Commission foreseen. And as for informing producers and consumers that the label exists, no EU-level campaign by the Commission is planned. So it'll be up to the member states again to advertise it if they want to. Eurosite itself actually has created a website to help promote the Natura 2000 label. And this website showcases goods and services from Natura 2000 areas around Europe, which would actually qualify for the Natura 2000 brand if it existed in that member state. And it shares the stories of the people behind each product and how it was created. So it's a nice web page to look at. I'd recommend it. And once member states have signed licensing agreements with the Commission, this website could be a really useful tool to advertise the branded products.
Is this for farmers or for
No, it's for producer. It's for producers of goods and services. So it can be farmers, it can be foresters, it can be tourist operators, it can be fish farmers. I mean, whatever. Okay. You know, it's all about, if you're in a Natura 2000 area, you're producing a good and a service, and you're actually compatible with the site Natura 2000 site objectives, you're actually helping to achieve the conservation objectives, you can get the label.
Is it Eurosite checking these criteria?
No, that's the problem. The problem is that it's subsidiarity. So the Commission has made a decision saying, member states, you can use the Natura 2000 label, not just to designate sites, as they've had to do for years, but also to designate producers who are doing good things for Natura 2000. But the member state has to want to do it. If the member state wants to do it, it will then sign a kind of contract with the Commission, and then it can use the Natura 2000 logo, to do this. And then the Commission will just say, okay, fine, great, member state, you do your thing. We don't really care. You don't report to us, and so forth. It's all very, very, very vague. Oh, that's an initiative of Eurosite together with the Commission. It has DG Environment support.
So a producer can just.
Yes, if you're a producer and you're in a Natura 2000 site and you would like, even if there's no Natura 2000 logo in your country, but you want to be advertised, sure, you can just send an email to Jennifer Alexander at Eurosite, and sure, it's open. We already have lots of stuff there. That's why I said it's worth looking at.
But then, sorry, if they ask to be on the website, you check something, or it's just.
That I think you'd have to ask Jennifer how it goes.
Did some products from Adept, and we had a discussion with them online. I mean, via Zoom meeting. We discussed, and they understood why we say that our products could potentially have this label, even though it doesn't exist in Romania. And they said, okay, just send us descriptions of each product and photos, and they uploaded it. So,
yeah. So I think at this moment, Eurosite is doing much on trust and reputation. I would say if it comes from a genuine conservation NGO, for instance, I mean it. But yeah, I think if you have someone more dubious, I don't know what they would do then. I mean, Eurosite probably does not have the budget to go and inspect on the spot. But okay.
But it's also not like our label or anything. It's basically just that we have this website. And we're trying to build this community, but yeah, the label is from the Commission, and we're not really the ones to check anything.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Just wondering, what is the criteria to come on the website?
apparently nobody. and not for the use of the
Yeah.
label.
Yeah, for the use of the Natura 2000 logo, like I said, there are no criteria really mentioned behind. Except the only criteria that you can find a decision is what I wrote here in red. That's pretty much the only criterion, you know. And the member states, if they want to use a label, have to work this out more in detail, what it actually technically means and so forth. But that actually brings you to the next slide. Oh no, yeah, one back. What's holding it back? That's one,
Yeah.
right? Okay, well, there we have this label. So far, the only member state that signed an agreement with the Commission to use the label is Spain, and is only using it to brand ecotourism, not farm produce or anything. A few other member states have shown some interest, but that's as far as it's gone. It doesn't really seem to be a political priority in most member states. And more fundamentally, at least in our discussion, the ABC group, is a problem. The geographic limitation of the label. I mean, most farmers will never be able to use it because they're simply not in the Natura 2000 area. And there are also farmers whose land is partly inside and partly outside Natura 2000. There are some who move the livestock into a Natura 2000 area in summer and take it out in the winter. I mean, so what do you do in those cases? I mean, fully and partial Natura 2000 origin, I mean, it's tricky. And in fact, one of our organizations taking part in the ABC working group, Fundación Global Nature from Spain, they actually used the Natura 2000 logo on the packaging of Stepper Bird friendly lentils and peas they were marketing some years ago. But then after a while, they discovered that the farmers who were growing the legumes had plots inside and outside Natura 2000. And it was really too complicated to try to disentangle the two, where the lentils come from, this plot or that plot. So in the end, they just dropped the Natura 2000 logo from the packaging. It just was too complicated. Okay. Then next one, please. Right. Now here's another one that we looked at. And this is one from an animal welfare background. And it might surprise some conservationists because historically conservation and animal rights have not always been the best of friends. But this food label, which is issued by the Dutch Animal Welfare Society, Dierenbescherming, actually turned out to be one of the better ones in terms of impact on nature values, which we examined. Well, given that this is from the animal welfare sector, it's not surprising that farmers who want to receive it have to obey a series of requirements connected to animal welfare, you know, like living space for livestock, ability to engage normal behavior, quality of the housing, and so forth and so forth. But next, please. But the Dierenbescherming, the Animal Welfare Society, actually broadened this label with measures in favor of nature, and that made it interesting for us. And the reasoning behind it is also rather interesting, the philosophy. According to the website, their reason is to give birds and other animals in the field a better life too, not just the livestock, the farm livestock, but also the wildlife. And the nature requirements of farmers who want this label have to obey include, for instance, that groundwater levels in species-rich grassland must be high between February 15 and June 15th, so that the soil is moist. And that's connected to meadowbirds, because for them, it's easy to forage and probe for invertebrates with the beaks when the soil is moist and therefore soft. So it's really thinking of bird welfare. And another requirement is to get the label is no mowing or other disturbing activity in species-rich grassland between April 1st and June 15th. Again, that's for the meadowbirds, so that to protect their nests and eggs and chicks and breeding success. It's not just like about saving Bambi, saving baby chicks, but it's also breeding success is also good for bird populations as such. And so here you get species conservation and animal welfare coinciding really beautifully. And so this is an agreeable surprise, and we would actually recommend opening discussions with the mainstream animal welfare movement, like Eurogroup for Animals, which is the umbrella for Europe, about labels, because this could open another door for supporting, for instance, extensive grazing, grass-fed livestock, and so forth. And then we also we also actually, next slide, please. I think this, oh, that's funny. The whole set seems to have vanished.
Is it?
No. No, there's one that seems to, there's one that's missing. There's actually one with different. Ah, there we are. That's the one. Yeah, that's the one. There you are. So I don't know where to. Okay, technology is with us today. We also looked at. So we looked at the sustainability labels that are run by these commercial companies. We looked at that. They pay farmers extra income for complying with the label, which is good. But we also examined the criterion used, just us to assign sustainability and the relative importance given to each criterion, and that was actually quite intriguing and not always so positive. So if you look at these examples of descriptions on the packaging of labeled products, dairy products in this case, for those who can read Dutch can read, it's about, they mention species-rich grassland and they mention pollinators, and they mention reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So there's all, and they have meadow birds. It's all great news. But what are the exact technical definitions behind all that? And that turned out to be rather surprising. For instance, permanent grassland, the way it's defined by Planet Proof, which is one of these labels, is quite surprising to an ecologist, because they say it's grassland, which is grassland at the beginning of, let's say, January. It was grassland in February of 2022. And when you come back in February 2023, it's still grassland. It's grassland, still grassland. But it doesn't mean that in the meantime you can manure it, you can harvest it intensely, you can even sow it anew. And grassland, which has been untouched for decades, what we would call permanent grassland, is actually called old grassland in their definition, and is actually is part of a completely different criterion. Another example is a species-rich grassland. Again, you would automatically think of lots of flora, lots of invertebrates. But actually, it's not what we would expect. It has more to do with seed mixes, which you can sow annually, like any crop of ryegrass. And the mixes which are allowed, to get the label are not monocultures, thankfully for that. But there is a range running from extensive, what they call extensive species-rich grass at one extreme, to productive species-rich grass the other extreme. And okay, the farmer does have to reach a minimum area of each type, and it varies per type to qualify for the label. In function of the number of species per square meter. But the problem is that as far as biodiversity is concerned, the extensive variety, which is the better one, because it has indigenous genotypes, the number of species is greater, and so forth. But the productive variety, which is less species, and where the seed can be non-indigenous genotypes, it's actually cheaper to buy. It gives less loss in productivity, and you can mow it 5 or 6 times a year, which is good for feeding the cows, but it does reduce your biological activity very much. And the problem is that many of the dairy farmers who want to get the label choose a productive variety because they want to fulfill the minimum requirements to get the label and get the extra payment, but they also want to keep grass productivity and milk yields as high as possible. And so this whole species-rich grassland thing is really, from an ecologist's point of view, very questionable. But the consumer reading these nice little stories on the packaging will say, "Wow, species-rich grassland." Another one, the climate. They're all the climate. Another issue that's it's a big deal in these labels actually, and they often measure the greenhouse gas emissions per kilogram of milk produced or per liter of milk produced. And that's also negative we found that was a negative thing. Because it's actually the advantage of farmers who have high yields per cow and per input of energy. So in a small farm with a few hectares of grassland, but a couple of hundred cows kept indoors as much of the year with feed brought to them, would have, if it could put solar panels all over the farm sheds, and perhaps a windmill or two, and their greenhouse gas emissions could be lowered enough for them to even qualify for the top level on these labels. Whereas another farm, which has a lot of grassland and has the cows grazing extensively, has therefore a lower milk output per cow, and therefore their greenhouse gas emissions, the way this system works, measured per liter, would actually be to their disadvantage. They would not qualify for the top level. They would never reach it. And it would, so for them, it would be much fairer to have greenhouse gas emissions per hectare of land farmed. And even more so because the carbon is stored in permanent pasture and landscape elements like hedges, which these farms are more of, simply not counted at all in the system where you measure the greenhouse gas per liter of milk produced. So again, it's this climate thing it's rather dubious from an ecological point of view, even if it is good from a climate point of view. So the lesson is, when you examine the technical details of at least these commercial labels, but it could be true for many other labels too, they're not always as beneficial for biodiversity as it might seem at first sight. And they might even discriminate against nature-friendly farmers. And this is not obvious to the consumer. I mean, this is a lot of research was done by particularly Carlene to find out all this stuff. You know, it's not obvious at all. So a consumer who wants to support nature and biodiversity might well be misled by this kind of label and story. Okay, next one. Yeah, so again, we have the problem that the nice stories and the nice pictures and the nice buzzwords on the packaging can be very misleading. And then anyway, and there's a statistic here how many dairy farmers actually carry the one label, and there's another label, and then the new label, Focus Planet, the sliding payments one. It'd be interesting to see how many of the 14,000 farmers who supplied Friesland Campina, how many of them actually take up the Focus Planet label. Be interesting to see, because it's a new one. Next one. Oh, where was the one that we had before? What's nature worth? That's one, yeah. They seem to be all over the place. Okay. Anyway, another weakness in these commercial sustainability labels is the variation between the payments per theme. You know that they pay the farmers according to themes. You know, you get points for nitrogen, for ammonia, for animal welfare, etc., etc. And this is actually for Focus Planet, which has a sliding scale, how it's broken down. And so you can see that if you do well on climate, on greenhouse gas emissions, you get a nice payment per quantity of milk produced. And it's really very heavily skewed towards climate. If you add up all the other themes, you don't even reach half the value you can get for climate. So it's really very much a climate label, and much more than anything else. And what does this mean? Well, to be very blunt, this is a farm producing 500,000 liters of milk a year, would get 7,500. If it gets the top level, it would get 7,500 euros for doing your best for emissions under Focus Planet, and would only get 500 euros a year for doing its best for nature under the system. So for a farmer, it will be 15 times more rewarding in purely monetary terms to invest in reducing carbon dioxide emissions than in improving nature and biodiversity on the farm. A maximum payment of 500 euros for a typical farmer producing 500,000 liters of milk a year. I mean, that's hardly an incentive. I mean, why bother to do anything for nature at all? That's what I would say if I was a farmer. And that these different environmental themes, you know, are rewarded at very different rates. That's really not clear to the consumer who's looking, just takes a packet out of the shop shelf and looks at the nice stories on it. It's simply not there. You have to do a lot of research to find out this kind of information. And well, climate activists should be really happy with the focus on emissions. But us as ecologists, I don't think that we can be too overjoyed by this. So there you are. That's the calculation, and which I just mentioned. Next one. Okay, so So these are all the questions that sort of kind of summarize what we've been looking at. Yeah, for instance, diversity of themes. As you saw, all these labels cover a lot of different themes, and because it covers too much, they try to do too much at once. They dilute their impact on any given theme, particularly the ones that are not climate related. They try to do too much at once. That might be a lesson. Yeah, and because there's a lot of this is not obviously consumer, maybe if for those who are interested in supporting nature, they might be best off with a pure nature-oriented label. But then we're creating yet another label, and there are so many labels. And in all fairness, I would want to say that although there's a lot of room for improvement, these commercial sustainability labels I've just mentioned, they're at least heading in the right direction. I mean, there's no label, there's no incentive at all. And what's more, they do actually pay farmers, for producing, which is that's, I think, is a big advantage over many of the other labels, which just hope that the farmer will get more income because he sells more or whatever. And another important aspect is that the commercial labels are backed by the power and the marketing skills of large food and retail companies. They can afford to advertise, they can afford to really push these labels. And that's potential asset. So I see, so it might be worth engaging with them. And next slide. So these are the suggestions, some of our suggestions for future action. And well, most of them are self-evident. At the bottom right, this to engage with existing labels to improve them clearly. To expand by that, I mean spreading the use of labels, which we hold to be worth endorsing, to countries where they're still not very common. And I'll give an example: the Netherlands. If I go shopping in the Netherlands, which I do from time to time, the shelves are full of labeled products. You really label all over the place. I go to my own shops in Belgium, hardly label to be seen. And so that's another thing we need to be mindful of, expanding labels to areas where they are still quite rare. Anyway, but these are more like to lead into the discussion. So I will stop here and thank you.
Thank you very much. That was very.
I was wondering, do you know about the percentages of buyers buying